Peace, 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 peace. Mama Salam Mel, thank you for joining us. By now you probably see that the whole situation with Iran is really serious. You may have seen some memes on the internet, some people on social media having jokes about being drafted or World War III. It's not really funny. Qasem Soleimani was a general who was assassinated, murdered in a different country, in a foreign country. The U.S., Donald Trump didn't get authorization from Congress, didn't get authorization from Iraq, where he killed and murdered this man. I mean, it's serious with Iran, but it's also serious with Iraq. And it's also serious on an international level. It's a war crime. And if you haven't seen, I'll show you on the screen, he's been threatening to bomb cultural sites. Why would you do that? Why would you even threaten that? That goes to the mentality. I don't want to say too much more. What I want to do is show some clips from some various news organizations and just different people, perspectives speaking on this. Again, study this information for yourself, research, look up different news, BBC, Russia Today, Press TV. Look at as many international news sources as you possibly can. Yeah. Peace. And especially at this time, love instead of hate. Put out that positivity. And as Moorish Americans, understanding our nationality and just what it means to have a nationality in nations. Now is the time for us to step up and speak up as true Americans. You feel me? Yeah.
Thousands of mourners fill this street in Baghdad. Iraq is the first to hold funeral processions for the 5 Iraqis and 5 Iranians killed by a U.S. airstrike on Friday. Many are dressed in black, waving Iraqi flags. And militia members are out in force, showing their loyalty to the 2 key figures killed in Friday's attack. Iraq's Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, deputy commander of an Iranian-backed coalition of militias, and General Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's elite military unit and the country's number 2 man. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani visited the family of Soleimani, sharing harsh words for the U.S.
The Americans are not aware of the big mistake they've made. They will face the consequences of their crime, not only today, but also in the coming years.
Soleimani was the mastermind behind Iran's military engagement in the Middle East for the last 2 decades. He was a close ally.
Good afternoon. As president, my highest and most solemn duty is the defense of our nation and its citizens. Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him. Under my leadership, America's policy is unambiguous to terrorists who harm or intend to harm any American. We will find you. We will eliminate you. We will always protect our diplomats, service members, all Americans, and our allies. For years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its ruthless Quds Force, under Soleimani's leadership, has targeted, injured, and murdered hundreds of American civilians and servicemen. The recent attacks on U.S. targets in Iraq, including rocket strikes that killed an American and injured 4 American servicemen very badly, as well as a violent assault on our embassy in Baghdad, were carried out at the direction of Soleimani. Soleimani made the death of innocent people his sick passion, contributing to terrorist plots as far away as New Delhi and London. Today we remember and honor the victims of Soleimani's many atrocities, and we take comfort in knowing that his reign of terror is over. Soleimani has been perpetrating acts of terror to destabilize the Middle East for the last 20 years. What the United States did yesterday should have been done long ago. A lot of lives would have been saved. Just recently, Soleimani led the brutal repression of protesters in Iran, where more than 1,000 innocent civilians were tortured and killed by their own government. We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
You think this is heading in a very bad direction. What do you think happens next?
Well, we've got to be clear-eyed about the situation that we are in, that inching closer, actually more than inching, speeding towards an all-out war with Iran would make the wars that we've seen in Iraq and in Afghanistan look like a picnic. It will be far more costly in lives, and American taxpayer dollars, and all towards accomplishing what goal, what objective? I think that's really at the crux of this decision that President Trump made to take out Soleimani. We've got to make sure that our commander-in-chief is making decisions that are based on the best interests of the safety and security of the American people, our own national security, and that's not what's happened here.
All right, so put yourself for a moment in the White House, in the Oval Office. You have a situation where tankers are being hit. You have a situation where an American contractor is killed, and then you have the embassy that we built. It is sovereign United States territory under attack. What would you do?
Well, actually work to de-escalate the situation. We've got to recognize that these things didn't just happen overnight. These things began with Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement, choosing to move away from diplomacy, further escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran, escalating crippling sanctions, a modern-day siege against Iran, sending more and more troops to the region, further escalating tensions, and designating Iran's military as a terrorist organization, further escalating this conflict with Iran, something that's never been done by any country anywhere in the world before.
All right.
And
but
this is where he has not put the national security interests of our country first. I just want to finish this because there's two main points here of how he has undermined our national security. Number one, every day that goes on that Iran is not in the nuclear agreement, and just, I think, yesterday announced that they're no longer abiding by any restrictions that were part of that agreement. That means they're closer to developing a nuclear weapon capability, putting us and the world at risk. And number two, because our forces in Iraq, for example, are no longer going to be focusing on defeating and ensuring that al-Qaeda and ISIS are not allowed a resurgence. Our commander there yesterday just said, we're not doing that anymore because now our troops have to focus on Iran, allowing ISIS and al-Qaeda to create and mount a resurgence that further puts us and our national security at risk.
Yep, there you go. They're in bed with Trump. There's a little bit more to this report. Let's go.
Enough is enough.
Earlier in the day, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said Iran may be planning new attacks against the U.S. and that the game has changed.
They just repeat. It's a fuck right. Go ahead.
It's the same war soundtrack from 2003. They just put in different names.
It is.
It is the exact same thing.
This is the exact same thing. They may be planning different. There's aluminum tubes. We know of aluminum tubes, for fuck's sake. We can't allow them to have aluminum. I know that they say there's people who say they know. And then we know a guy who says he knows a guy. That's what this is. And this is the CBS pro-war, bullshitting, lying news station doing exactly Trump's bidding, the bidding of Raytheon, the military-industrial complex, Wall Street. And who are they not doing the bidding of? Their viewers. That's who they're not doing the bidding of. The people who actually tune to them for information about what's going on are being misled and outright lied to. Let's watch the rest of this.
Part of Iran's malign behavior that they've been spreading across the region from Africa all the way through the Middle East into Afghanistan now for 40 years.
So the irony is there. That guy, I think, is looking in a mirror when he says that. Because, of course, it's the United States. We overthrew Iran's original democratically elected president, Mossadegh, in the 50s. Why? Because he wanted to keep the oil for his people, and he wanted to expand democracy. And the CIA and the United States and the capitalists, they cannot rely on democracies. They can rely on dictators to do what they need. And what does that give us? Their frickin' oil and to maintain the petrodollar. That's exactly. And so what have we been doing ever since? We've been going around the Middle East ever since the 50s. Blowing it up and setting it on fire, and it's always backfired. It's never worked out, not one time ever. From Libya to Syria to Afghanistan to Lebanon to the Sudan to Somalia to Iran, Iraq, where the fuck has it ever worked?
Yeah, and you hear him say Africa. Iran is taking over Africa.
Yes.
I remember a U.S. Service member was killed in Namibia last year, and Lindsey Graham, one of the biggest warmongers in Congress, was exasperated because he didn't know that there were U.S. troops in Namibia, 1,000 of them. He said, I didn't know there were that many U.S. troops there, but I guess that's a good thing. I mean, this is imperial projection at its most extreme. We're accusing Iran of doing everything that we're doing. Oh, they're in Afghanistan. You know who's been in Afghanistan for 20 years? I mean, come on.
It's
Iran's neighbor too. I mean, Iran has the right to protect its frontiers.
Yeah, Max, I expect the Pentagon to say that. What is truly criminal is that the newsman repeats it uncritically. That doesn't give you any context, doesn't say just what Ron said. By the way, I'm old enough to remember this is exactly what they said with the first Iraq war. They're just changing the names. Ron knows that. I know that. You know that. And so does the guy reporting this know that. So does the producer who's putting this piece together. And so does the fucking director. So does everybody know this. But they're lying. That's what this is all about. Let me finish this news report before I blow a gasket. Here we go.
And it's this type of bad behavior that simply needs to end.
President Trump warned earlier this week Iran would pay a price, but he did not want war.
I don't think that would be a good idea for Iran. It wouldn't last very long. Do I want to? No. I want to have peace. I like peace.
The U.S. military throughout the Middle East has been ordered to hunker down and be ready for Iranian retaliation. Tariq?
And there's their big report. That's their report! That's that guy. Go back to this guy. Could you show? That's this guy. Now, this guy's 1,000 years old. He's seen every war that we've ever been into since 1812. So he knows this is bullshit 100%. He knows this is the exact playbook they used in Iraq the first time, second time, Libya, Syria. He knows what they're doing, and he gives you this report. That guy is a bought and paid for piece of shit fucking liar. Max,
yeah,
now I give it to you, Max.
It's the beginning of this protest, and it's great to see so many people out here. You know, I check out all the anti-war protests, and this is one of the bigger ones. So it's good to see that people are rightfully frustrated. You know, people keep saying Trump is going to start a war. The thing is, Trump already started a war. Killing a top general of a foreign sovereign nation is an act of war, and now Iran has to respond. Now, what the form that war looks like are up in the air still, and whether or not it's going to be a conventional war with the army fighting another army, it's probably not going to be that. But Trump started a war, and Iran has no option but to respond. You know, a lot of people have been comparing it to Iran assassinating Mike Pence, the vice president, but in some ways, actually, this is even more extreme. Qasem Soleimani was the second or third most powerful person in the Iranian government. He was a top Iranian official, the head of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the U.S. government considers that to be a terrorist organization, but the U.S. is not the ruler of the world. The United Nations considers the IRGC the rightful military wing of the Iranian government, which sits at the United Nations, which is an internationally recognized government. So the U.S. can't just say, this is a terrorist organization and we're going to kill foreign leaders. This is an act of war. And it's the only way that this is going to stop, of course, is if we have people in the streets, is also if Trump understands that what he just did is an extreme crime, because the thing is, Trump doesn't understand the gravity of what he's doing. Trump is an idiot, and I'm not trying to let him off on what he does. I mean, he is totally responsible for carrying out this illegal act of war.
Well, reports were he didn't even know who Soleimani was.
Exactly. He didn't know what the Quds Force is. In fact, I remember there was an interview a few years ago where he couldn't distinguish the Kurds and the Quds Force. So he obviously didn't know who the head of it was, Qasem Soleimani. I mean, this is so outrageous. So there need to be protests around the country. There need to be, protests around the world. And fortunately, there are right now. But we also need a Democratic Party that's going to stand up against Trump, because we saw a great statement from Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren's statement was pretty bad.
He was a bad guy, but...
he was a murderer. And it's like, wait, so generals... There are generals in the world who aren't killers? Like, what? Their job is they're the head of a military, and it's like, who are they killing and why are they killing them? There's this idea that Soleimani was a terrorist. No, first of all, Soleimani helped to lead the fight against ISIS. And were it not for Soleimani and were it not for Iran, ISIS would have taken over probably all of Iraq and potentially Syria as well. So that needs to be acknowledged. Trump is trying to take credit for destroying ISIS. The U.S.
And Al-Qaeda he went after, correct?
Absolutely. Because the thing is, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the people they hate more than anyone else in the world, are Shia Muslims. Iran is a Shia majority country. And they see Shia as apostates and have committed genocide against Shia. If you actually look at the majority of ISIS and Al-Qaeda suicide bombings of mosques, they're Shia mosques. So Iran, of course, as a Shia majority country, sees ISIS and Al-Qaeda as an existential threat, much more of a threat than we see ISIS. So Iran was a leading force in defeating ISIS. Trump is trying to take credit for it now, but the main forces who defeated ISIS were Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and Russia, all the big boogeymen, the bad guys, right? So we have to push back against this idea that Soleimani was a terrorist. Yeah, he did kill people because he was the general who helped lead an army, and he was killing other soldiers in a war. That's what every general does.
But he was also, in many cases, killing soldiers in a war that the United States started in Iraq.
Exactly. And the U.S. invaded Iraq in this illegal war, and everyone knew that Iran was the country they were going after. In fact, Wesley Clark, a top U.S. general, famously disclosed that the Bush administration had drafted a list of 7 countries in 5 years they wanted to attack. And the top of that list, the cherry on top, was Iran. The U.S. was...
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there was definitely, there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force.
I haven't written anything down in a long time, but I did today, because I feel like today is just as dire, just as critical as the days before the U.S. invaded Iraq. Yes. When it was critical that people came out to voice their opposition and to start building the networks that were necessary to fight against it. We're at that moment again now. We haven't been at a bigger moment in a long time, in 15 years, since March of 2003. But I wanted to take it back a little bit further first. When I was 7 years old, in 1990, I remember writing letters to George H.W. Bush, telling him not to go to war with Iraq in 1990. But they did. And U.S. warplanes burned civilians alive in their cars while they were escaping the battlefield. And we bombed that country for a decade from that point on. Sanctioned the country that killed 1 million civilians. And then Clinton came into office. What did he do? He bombed Iraq. And then 2003 comes around. We demonstrated in 2003 also. Actually, the biggest day of world protest ever in global history was in February in the lead up to the Iraq war. But they still went to war and they invaded. They killed 1 million Iraqis. They subjected the Iraqi people to untold brutality and horrors and terrorism on a daily basis, occupying their streets. And now here we are again today, on the eve of another major war in Iraq, this time bringing Iran into it. And we are here to say that just as we've been here through the past 30 years of you refusing to give the Iraqi people peace, that we will be here to fight you every step of the way. And it's also important to say, and I say this as someone who is a part of that invasion of Iraq in 2003, who occupied that country for a year. Right now it's easy for Democrats and some in the media to criticize Trump for this action. But I tell you what, if any U.S. soldiers die in the next couple days in retaliation by Iraqi forces or Iranian forces, they're going to fold very quickly, and they're going to be beating Trump for war too. So it's important to say now, if any U.S. soldiers are killed in Iraq, where they shouldn't be, as a result of Trump's action, that is Trump's fault. That is not the Iraqi people's fault.
سلام علیکم و رحمت الله. من قبل از آنی که سخنرانی خودم رو شروع کنم، چون امروز سال روز شهادت مالکوم ایکس، رهبر سیاهان مسلمان آمریکاست، از حضار محترم خواهش میکنم حمد و قل هو اللهی برای روح اون شهید بخوانیم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم.